Hello, this is the San Francisco Open Mic Poetry Podcast TV show with John Rhodes and Clara Sue. And today we have on, in my segment, Joan Barono, and in Clara's we have Peggy Morrison. Clara will go into more detail in her segment about Peggy. Joan Barono I ran into through another friend, D. Jane McPherson, and Joan is a Marin poet, and she teaches, and so she's been into poetry, she says, since she was young, and she's much more educated about writing and poetry than me, I imagine, but or possibly in another way. But do you have any something you might want to say about your poetry or about poetry itself or whatever?
Well, in recent years, I've become interested in the connection between poetry and healing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm married to a doctor who's also a poet.
Oh, okay.
And so that sort of brought those two worlds together. And
I heard you using the word healing when we were
that's
talking
right.
before. So
yes, yes. So I think it's sort of a side effect
Uh-huh.
of writing. If you're writing about something important
A
to
symptom.
you, yeah, that it has that cathartic effect,
Uh-huh.
but it's very satisfying. It's very pleasing to
Uh-huh.
write, and so it makes you happy,
Uh-huh.
even if you're writing about something that's
Sad. Yeah.
You know.
Okay, and I guess we'll cut this clip here, and then Joan can read her poetry.
This first poem is called Writing Poetry. I spent 2 weeks at a retreat where all I had to do was write poetry. And it was in Virginia, so there are some references to being there. And so it's called Writing Poetry. Enormity is always too large for these slim columns, each poem hopeless, like trying to stuff a suitcase for a trip to eternity. What will you need? Everything, of course. The bathing suit you wore before your breasts came in, your mother's hug, the feel of her flesh like fleece thrown over delicate bones, your first husband's humor, beach sand stuck to your lips, hot afternoons with a book. Don't get me started on books. This Virginia air as dense as bread, red darts of cardinal, a gazillion days worth of tamoxifen, air on the G-string your stepdaughter played for her father's contentious second wedding. Every letter you kept, moldered by now, ancient Bic pen impossible to read. Even your brother's last note, the one you wanted to tear up. You see, by now it's impossible to stop. It's always incomplete, even leaving all the plastic out. For this trip you have to choose from your mind's closet possibly the outfit that embarrassed you the most. That one-piece watermelon suit paired with neutral shoes. But that's okay. Don't give up. You might get lucky. Things may have shifted during flight. You'll be struck hard, and everyone who's come this far with you in cramped coach will pick something up and hand it back, an infinite sympathy shining in their eyes. One of the poets on your program had a beautiful line that I wrote down. The study of truth, let me see if I can find it. The study of truth has made a Greenland of me. It's beautiful. And so I thought I'd read this poem about Iceland. It's called Cold Pastoral. Iceland is the world's youngest country, as in land discerned by water. One of those facts that does tease us out of thought, even though thinking is the one thing we can't not do. The brain vibrating in a vast gray, fatty matter, a sort of insulation for ideas like phreatic eruption, latitudinal biodiversity gradient, karyokinesis, Brahms-Strongling, and Burger King's Whopper. But here in Iceland, fretful clouds shred themselves, wind brisks the birches, Puffins perch on volcanic perforations where the island spewed and cooled. What dread umbilicus? Ash and basalt strewn across the tundra, everywhere a mess. This baby's been stripped and left on its own exposed plateau. Try saying HVANNADALSHNUKUR, a place only indulgent aunts will visit. Easy enough now to find on the map, but just ask about 95% of the universe and no one knows where it is. This is called an Ode to Static. And there's a little allusion at the end to John Keats's Bright Star, Ode to Static. A freight train, fretful, passing through the ditch, complains of a stomach ache. Its wail, infantile, spasmodic, reminds the poet to put great spurts of static in her verse. When lulled by a valved voice, drugged by love or opium, rough it up. The sum depends on syncopation, boisterous, steroidal, caesuric split signatures of tune, not unlike stomping a foot to wake the student up. How easy, else, to expire there, pillowed on a breathing breast, steadfast, starlit, mewing, like kittens put to sleep. I've been reading some John Keats recently. Beautiful, beautiful poet. And so this poem was inspired by his Ode to a Nightingale, and I call it Ode to Keats. But of course death blackens breath, hacks up a bone, conjures rags, vials, tinctures, streaked bed sheets, flies. Not much to do but lay a cool cloth across the eyes and listen to that, what? Nightingale, naturally. Who wouldn't drowse when doubt-stricken, aroused by half-heard melody? Darkling, you say, to die sublimed by birdsong, luscious death wish steeped in incense. Darling, your ardent self yearns me a lot. Influence or influenza? Tell me, is earth enough? So I've been trying to go back and forth between writing poems that are very lyrical and compressed and then writing poems that are more fragmented and use the prose line. And so this is called A Whole Afternoon Rescuing Brown Marmorated Stink Bugs. You know those apple dimples? That's where they stick their proboscis in and suck teaspoons of juice. It takes an evolved tongue, not like shoving a straw into a watermelon. When we tire of gin and tonic, tears will do. You thought the heat had passed, but today's sun bristles the skin. Still, she's riding the mower, snapping grass in half, making a bouquet of diesel and chlorophyll. What's the upshot of the dream where your son flung himself off the 10-story foam-filled vinyl slide? A stream below, boulders, a piney woods. He drops, you watch. Words cling to your mouth, just as about to, give me a min. For some, the clanging won't stop. This stink bug, flecked with iridescence, steps from the plastic cup onto the porch rail, tips over, tips back, splits its wings, flies. In fact, we prefer tears, tasting as they do of the womb. And then the last poem I'll read is a poem about observing nature called At Eye Level. Gnats like being eye to eye, unlike bees and flies and, well, most creatures. On a bench, you'll be surprised by a passing squirrel's dropped seeds, half an acorn gnawed through the middle. A fly might light on an open book, but he's otherwise occupied. Those frogs along the water's rim, one looking that way, one another, rest there like old men, minus arthritis. And fish, what do they see of trees and sky but a world without edges, reflective, like looking into a spoon at your own estranged features? Thank you.
Thank you, Joan, for your poetry. I'm going to read one short poem. It doesn't have a title at the moment, but I'm going to make one up. I'll call it I Left My Art in San Francisco. And here's the poem. It's short. I left my art with Bart in San Francisco. I still hear the roar of Bart calling to me. And on the cable cars that climb halfway up to Babel, you can hear the cuckoo bird ring halfway up the hill. In the fog, this twin of Paris turns his Trojan coat of war inside out, which makes the fog a darker gray. And you ask me about phony Rice-A-Roni and Tony, and about phoning Jimmy D and calling San Francisco home. But you know Gandhi left his satin hat and went to Manhattan to chew the fat in Latin. And he talked about the man who left his dreamcoat in San Francisco, and he cried a tear of pity for the city by the bay. Thank you. And on television, Clara will will have her guest next. And thank you for watching.